earth-shattering boom rang out, and waves of tremendous shock waves erupted in all directions from the point where Mo Guang and the gold-devouring Immortal clashed, causing the nearby mountain faces to tremble violently as loose rocks came tumbling down like rain. The black spear was bent like a bow before abruptly straightening out again. Propelling itself and Mo Guang directly upward like a cannonball, a grim look appeared on Han Li's face as he watched Mo Guang flying back into the dense, baleful qi. If it weren't for the fact that Mo Guang had taken over the body of an unfathomably powerful grey immortal, the force of that clash alone would have most likely been enough to completely pulverize his body. As for the gold-devouring immortal, it was forced involuntarily downward, and right at this moment, Han Li's mantra Treasured Axis emerged amid an eruption of bright golden light. The 18-time law threads around the axis vanished into it, and all of the Time Dao runes on its surface, of which there were over 400, were glowing radiantly. Waves of golden ripples surged through the air as a huge golden space instantly took shape, encompassing the gold-devouring immortal within it. The gold-devouring immortal immediately felt as if it had fallen into a swamp, and all of its movements became extremely slow and sluggish. It wanted to lash out and destroy the golden axis, but the circulation of its immortal spiritual power had slowed down to a crawl, making it very difficult to muster up any power. At the same time, golden light was flashing erratically over its body, indicating that it was struggling with all its might to oppose the mantra Treasured Axis. Bursts of formidable law power fluctuations surged out of its body to combat the surrounding golden ripples, and the entire golden space began to tremble. But much to Han Li's relief, it wasn't displaying any signs of collapsing for now. If he hadn't progressed to the pinnacle of the golden immortal stage, the gold-devouring immortal would have most likely already freed itself at this point. With no time to waste, Han Li cycled through a rapid string of hand seals as he injected his immortal spiritual power into his mantra Treasured Axis without any reservation, using the axis to trap the gold-devouring immortal. He knew that he wouldn't be able to trap the gold-devouring immortal for long, and, with that in mind, he immediately swept a sleeve through the air to summon the profound heavenly gourd. A circle of tiny runes around the gourd began to flash erratically as a burst of radiant green light erupted out of its opening, and there was a burst of repulsion force that was being suppressed within the gourd. Having to simultaneously control both the mantra Treasured Axis and the profound heavenly gourd, Han Li's immortal spiritual power and spiritual sense were both being expended at an alarming rate. All of a sudden, he let loose a low roar while making a hand seal, and the green light at the opening of the gourd instantly reached an unprecedented level of brightness, while a burst of thunderous rumbling rang out within the gourd. Immediately thereafter, one azure bamboo cloud swarm sword after another shot out of the gourd at an incredible speed, and there were 8 of them in total, all of which were aimed directly at the gold-devouring immortal's heart. A string of sharp clangs rang out alongside flashes of blinding golden lightning. In order to ensure that the power of the swords wasn't compromised, Han Li was attacking with the swords themselves, rather than unleashing any sword projections. Enhanced by his time-spirit domain, the flying swords were sped up even further, and, in the span of just a few seconds, several hundred blows had already been dealt upon the same spot on the gold-devouring immortal's body, but it remained completely unscathed. The gold-devouring immortal was still struggling violently against the time-spirit domain, but it was completely unconcerned as it chortled, "Struggle all you want. Once you run out of tricks, your fate will be sealed." All the while, Jin Tong was looking on while gritting her teeth in frustration and remorse. If she had worked harder in her cultivation during her time with Kuling, perhaps she wouldn't be so powerless right now. Right as she was racking her brains to try and think of a way to break through the gold-devouring immortal's defenses, Han Li suddenly began to make one final push, drawing upon all of his remaining immortal spiritual power before releasing it like floodwaters through a broken dam. At the same time, runes on the surface of the profound heavenly gourd became blindingly bright, and the tip of a sword began to emerge from the opening of the gourd. The green vortex within the gourd was revolving at an incredible speed, and it had accumulated so much power that it resembled a volcano on the brink of eruption. All of a sudden, Han Li let loose a loud roar, and the entire gourd shuddered violently as the tip of the sword protruding out of its opening abruptly vanished. In the same instant, a green shadow struck the gold-devouring immortal's chest like a bolt of lightning, and a resounding clang rang out as the gold-devouring immortal shuddered violently. At the same time, a flurry of golden lightning and bursts of formidable sword chi erupted forth in all directions, completely eradicating the surrounding baleful chi. The bottom of the ravine and the two mountain faces on either side of it were also severely ravaged in the blink of an eye, with giant gashes that were over 1,000 feet deep sliced into the solid rock. The golden light over the gold-devouring immortal's chest shattered layer after layer, and a tiny crack that was as thin as a strand of hair finally appeared on its incredibly resilient exoskeleton. The gold-devouring immortal's pupils contracted drastically as it felt its own defenses being breached, and it began to struggle even more violently. As a result, the time-spirit domain became extremely unstable, and it looked as if it could be overwhelmed at any moment. A hint of disappointment flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but he wasn't surprised by this outcome. The final sword that had just been released was the Azure Bamboo Cloud Swarm sword that had been refined in the gourd for the longest period of time, and it had already displayed more power than Han Li had expected. If that sword had struck any other late High Zenith stage, being that wasn't the gold-devouring immortal, they definitely wouldn't have been able to get away with such a minor injury. Han Li didn't dwell on his disappointment as he immediately switched to a different hand seal, and the 9 Azure Bamboo Cloud Swarm swords converged to form a single sword. Instead of continuing to control the flying swords with his spiritual sense, Han Li grabbed onto the sword formed by the 9 Azure Bamboo Cloud Swarm swords before charging directly at the gold-devouring immortal. At this point, the gold-devouring immortal had already flown into a blind rage, and it was continuing to struggle with all its might. But Han Li paid no heed to this as he plunged his sword straight at the tiny crack on the gold-devouring immortal's chest. In this instant, he was releasing his immortal spiritual power, divine Devilbane lightning and sword chi without any reservation. Resounding clang rang out as Han Li swiveled around before instantly unleashing another strike, and he repeated the process over and over again in rapid succession. Each successive blow fell faster and stronger than the previous one, and layers upon layers of divine Devilbane lightning and sword chi were building upon each other, all of which were accumulating at the crack on the gold-devouring immortal's chest like a volcano that could erupt at any moment. At this point, Mo Guang had already returned to the ravine, but he didn't immediately re-enter the fray. Instead, he could see what Han Li's intentions were, and he knew that it was best to stay away for now. As for the gold-devouring immortal, it could sense the threat that Han Li was posing, and it had already completely lost its composure as it struggled frantically against the mantra treasured axis. As Han Li's time-spirit domain was steadily whittled down, the mantra treasured axis was also affected, and it began to tremble violently, as did all of the Time Dao runes on its surface. At this point, Han Li's spiritual sense was severely overexerted, and his eyes had turned completely bloodshot, while blood was trickling out of his ears and flowing down his cheeks like a pair of tiny crimson snakes. However, his hands remained as steadily as ever as he delivered one sword strike after another. Despite his efforts, the crack on the gold-devouring immortal's chest hadn't been enlarged at all. Finally, with the 361st sword strike that was unleashed, Han Li was unable to suppress the divine Devilbane lightning and sword chi that had been building up this entire time any longer, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as a vast explosion of golden lightning took place, forming a lightning vortex that completely encompassed the gold-devouring immortal. At the same time, a vast sea of sword chi exploded from a single, concentrated spot on the gold-devouring immortal's chest. The golden lightning and white sword chi intertwined to form a giant pillar of golden and white light that erupted directly upward Almost piercing through the entire ravine, an agonized roar erupted out of the gold-devouring mortal's mouth, and its fury was elevated to an unprecedented peak. The wings on its back abruptly exploded, releasing a burst of tremendous power. The mantra-treasured axis was already only just barely containing the gold-devouring immortal, and it was instantly sent flying back through the air with tremendous force. The gold-devouring immortal took a furious glance down at the extremely deep and long gash on its chest, and it spat through gritted teeth. "You'll pay for this." Normally, it would have been able to recover from an injury like this in a matter of seconds. But this gash was displaying no signs of healing. As it turned out, the residual lightning and sword chi around the gash were severely hampering the healing process.